For UFC 282, we already did our predictions, we already did our final picks, we already looked at what your lineup should probably look like. But if you're watching this video, that means you saw the thumbnail and you know that this is not for a normal slate, this is for Captain Mode, and let me explain why. I see huge opportunities for us in the Captain Mode space. For starters, nobody's making content surrounding Captain Mode because the salaries come out too late. It's too tight of a time crunch, it really is. But if we can make it work, and I think we can, then we're in an interesting position because we can use Captain Mode this week, especially considering the first 3 fights that are on the card that aren't featured in this type of game. When you open up Draftkings and look at Captain Mode, you're going to see that there are 9 fights that you're able to choose from this week. That means we can't play the first 3 fights from UFC 282 in this mode. So you can't play Billy Quarantilo, you can't play Erik Silva, and you can't play Cameron Saaiman or Steven Koslow. And I think that's important to identify this week because those 3 have a very good chance of being optimal. So if you didn't have any of the first fight, let's say you took a shot on TJ Brown and he lost, let's say Billy Quarantilo went nuclear like he is one to do and you didn't have him in your lineup, then you're sunk already. If you make some Captain Mode lineups, then at least after the first 3 fights, you're not completely sunk if you didn't play any of those guys. So with 9 fights remaining, how do we build lineups for Captain Mode? Well, if you're unfamiliar, Captain Mode is a little bit different. So you have the captain at the top who's going to get 1.5x his score. And as a result, they're priced up and they're 1.5x their salary. You'll notice here if I go to fighter, Edmen Shabazyan's now 9,600. Magomed Ankalaev is now 9,400. So some guys are a little bit more, some guys are a little bit less, and obviously when you have them in the captain spot, they're going to be a lot more. So when you're building your captain lineups, what you need to do is you need to identify who has high upside and who's affordable in the captain spot. Because you're probably not going to put Paddy Pimblett in the captain spot. That leaves 7,300 remaining salary per fighter left, and I'll show you what that would look like. Well, if you go down here to Ilia, Topuria, and Bryce Mitchell, this is where you go from favorite to underdog. So you could theoretically play somebody like Bryce Mitchell. If you wanted to come to Chris Curtis, you could do that. But then you're really stuck having to play in the mid-range. Let's say you went with Jairzinho, Rozenstruik. Let's say you came back down here and you grabbed somebody like, I don't know, I don't really like Dalcha, I don't like Jan, I don't like Gordon, I don't like Perrin. Darren Till's the first person that's kind of interesting because I think he could catch Duplessis with a counter, but I'm not really too high on Darren Till in this spot. The other viable option that I see here is Chris Daukaus. That leaves you 9,900 left over, and you can come up here and grab somebody like Shabazyan. Not a bad lineup, but not the approach that I would take in Captain Mode this week. What I'd like to do is I'd like to grab an underdog in Captain Mode, somebody who I think has a high chance of finishing, somebody who can score a lot of points, and somebody who probably isn't going to grab a whole lot of ownership. So if we take a look at these underdogs, we see that Bryce Mitchell, 9,900 if he's in the captain spot. Chris Curtis, I don't want to put him in the captain spot because both of these guys are probably going to see a lot of ownership. But Chris Daukaus is interesting. We talked about this a little bit in the final picks video. Everybody and their mother is on Jairzinho Rozenstruik this week, and people are completely overlooking Chris Daukaus, even though Chris Daukaus outlands Biggie Boy nearly 3-1 normally when he fights. If Chris Daukaus comes up with a first or second round finish here and you have him in the captain spot, you're going to win your contest as long as you build the rest of your lineup the right way. And now that we have such a cheap captain, we could do that pretty easily. You're still going to be in a position where you're wanting to play an underdog, at least one of them. So if you came here to Bryce Mitchell hoping that he can lean on that grappling, now you can come up here to somebody like Rosas Jr. You could grab somebody like Dricus Duplessis if you wanted to. Santiago Ponzinibbio is there. He might not score a ton, but he's in a good matchup, and now you can come all the way up here to Edmen Shabazyan. If you wanted to change it up a little bit and you take Dricus Duplessis out and you want to go the other way in that fight with Darren Till, now you have 2,600 left over and you can make some things happen. If I'm in this position, what I'm doing is taking out Santiago Ponzinibbio and I'm probably going up to Magomed Ankalaev. You could even come off of Bryce Mitchell if you wanted to. It doesn't leave you a whole lot to work with, but if you wanted to go, say, with Joaquin Buckley, knowing he's got power, or you wanted to go the other way in that Bryce Mitchell, Ilia, Topuria matchup, you could do that. And just to give you another look, let's say you didn't go with an underdog with high finishing upside. Let's say you went the other way and you went with Biggie Boy. Let's say everybody and their mother is right in picking Biggie Boy this week to win by first round knockout. It's definitely possible. The guy has the touch of death. We've seen Chris Daukaus knocked out in his last 2 fights, and it can happen again here for a third time. This leaves us with 38,600 left over. Well, then you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're going to have to play an underdog, and I will come back here to my guys Chris Curtis, Bryce Bryce Mitchell, 8,500 left over. You're probably going to have to grab somebody like Ponzinibbio at that point. You're going to have to grab somebody like Duplessis at that point. And now you can come up here to the Magomed Ankalaevs, Paddy Pimblett's, Rosas Juniors of the world. This is a fine lineup. Now, if you wanted to, what you could do in this situation is you could come down here and you could punt somebody like Perrin, who we've talked about this in the last video. I don't think Perrin's getting finished here. I expect him to reverse position a few times, and I think that he might get a takedown in this spot, and he might steal the third round, depending on what Rosas Jr. looks like late. A lot of us like to point to his age and say he's 18 years old, he's going to be able to push this crazy pace the whole time, but that's not necessarily the case. Just because he's 18 doesn't mean he has this crazy cardio. That could be the case. I'm not saying that it isn't, but I'm not giving him a cardio edge just because of his age. We've seen Perrin now fight high-level competition hard late in the third round, even on short notice. So Perrin in your lineup, and then you go with Rosas Jr. as well. This is more for if you're playing really small field, say single entry, or if you're playing cash games in captain mode, which you could do. If we wanted to build our lineups this way, let's say we came here and we put Chris Daukaus in the captain spot. Now we can grab somebody like Paddy, we can grab Duplessis, and then we can come all the way up here to Edmen Shabazyan. That looks pretty good. If you want a better matchup than what you have with Duplessis, you can come off of him and you can grab somebody like Santiago Ponzinibbio. There you go. Now, if you wanted to get different, I think a good way of getting different if you're playing, say, a larger field contest is putting Magomed Ankalaev right there in the captain spot. His high price tag, typical low output, typical low Draftkings score will keep a lot of people off of him, and you're going to have a lot of leverage against the field if he ends up putting on a clinic for 25 minutes against Blachowicz this week. Obviously, this leaves money a little tight for us at 71.80 left over, so I think that you're going to have to take a shot on some underdogs here. I'm going to go with my guys here. I'm going to go with Daukaus, go with Curtis, go with Mitchell, 84.50 left over. It really doesn't leave us a whole lot to work with. We could go Ponzinibbio. You could get back up here to Rosas Jr. I don't think that's terrible. I take back what I said about not having a whole lot to work with here because this looks great. Again, you're asking a lot for these three underdogs to come through, but that's also why we play the game. Now, if you didn't like my picks this week and you think, well, I think Joaquin Buckley goes out there and scores a knockout, or I think Ilia Topuria goes out there and scores a knockout, I don't think he's going to be highly owned in the captain spot either. Let's say you went against the grain, against what we looked at this week. If you went with Topuria, you went with Rozenstruik, you came down here and grabbed somebody like Darren Till, now you've got 87.66 left over. That's when you grab Rosas Jr., that's when you grab Ponzinibbio, and you come back up here to Edmen Shabazyan. With this lineup, you have knockout upside, knockout upside, knockout upside, grappling upside, obviously very high ceiling. Ponzinibbio, I think you just have a very safe matchup there and very affordable price that helps you do everything else in your lineup. And then you have Edmen Shabazyan, who should pack Lungiambula up. And we'll look at one more combination that I think is going to be a little bit underowned. It's something that people aren't looking at. Drickus Duplessis, put him in the captain spot. Come down here and grab somebody cheap. Let's say you went with Polish Power, right? Let's say Jan Blachowicz somehow got it done this week. Well, again, you can come right back here to Santiago Ponzinibbio. I think at this point I would probably go grab myself an underdog, maybe Bryce Mitchell in this situation. Grab Paddy the Batty, grab Rosas Jr. You've left 700 salary on the table, and this is another fine lineup. In the past, before they offered the late swap that they have now on the classic slate, you were able to use the slate to get an idea of what ownership might look like later, and you could still kind of do that. As you know, you can change your lineup right up until lock. Well, if we look at the favorites in the early fights, Saaiman, Billy Quarantilo, and Erik Silva, you're going to know what the ownership is like for those guys after they fight. So you know that if a lot of people are playing Saaiman, that means a ton of people probably aren't going to be on Edmen Shabazyan. So do your best to pay attention to the classic slate, look at what's happening during the early prelims, and try to get in the head of your opponent, see what they might be doing on a captain slate later on. And to give you an example, let's say Cameron Saaiman is coming in way lower owned than you expected, and let's say the same is happening for Billy Quarantilo, but a lot of people are playing playing Erik Silva. Again, this is game theory. The science is imperfect, but you could make the assumption based on that a lot of people are coming up to play somebody like Paddy Pimblett. A lot of people are coming up to play somebody like Edmen Shabazyan. So little things that you could try to do to get an edge on your competition, but those are my thoughts specifically on captain mode. If you haven't already, watched the videos from earlier in the week, the predictions, the final picks. I'll link them in the description. And tell me what you guys think. Do you want to see captain mode? Do you play captain mode? Will you start playing captain mode? Let me know. Let me know if this is valuable information and valuable content for you. As always, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Best of luck, and I hope to see you at the top.